Officer woke up that Tuesday morning with no idea that his entire life was about to change. He'd been a police officer for 17 years, and the K-9 unit for the last 5. He'd seen dangerous criminals caught, drugs seized, and missing people found, all with the help of his incredible partner, Duke. But nothing had prepared him for what was about to happen at Riverside Community Center. As he drove his patrol car toward the gymnasium, Duke sat in the back seat, his tongue hanging out happily, his golden eyes watching the familiar streets pass by. The German Shepherd had no idea this would be the most significant day of his life. Neither did. The morning was crisp and clear, one of those perfect autumn days when the sun filtered through the trees in golden streams. Had been driving this route for months. Routine community demonstrations were part of his job now. Build relationships with the public. Show children that police officers and their K-9 partners were approachable, not scary. It seemed simple enough. He'd given dozens of these presentations. Duke was a natural performer, obedient and impressive, always drawing gasps and applause from amazed children. Had the whole thing down to a science by now. Arrive, set up, demonstrate Duke's skills, answer questions, leave. Simple, predictable, safe. What didn't know was that today would be different. Today, everything would shift. When arrived at Riverside Community Center at 8:30 in the morning, the gymnasium was already buzzing with anticipation. The facility coordinator, Mrs. Williams, greeted him at the entrance with her characteristic warm smile. "Officer, we're so excited you're here today," she said enthusiastically. "We have about 200 children gathered from the 3 elementary schools in our district. Parents have been calling all week asking if their kids could attend." "Word about Duke's visit has spread like wildfire," smiled back, feeling a familiar sense of pride. Duke was special. Every child in the community knew about him. The German Shepherd had been featured in the local news twice already, and his social media accounts had thousands of followers. Led Duke through the hallways toward the gymnasium, the dog's nails clicking rhythmically against the polished tile floor. As they approached the large double doors, could hear the cacophony of children's voices, excited, loud, chaotic. Some kids were shouting. Others were running around despite teachers' attempts to maintain order. This was always the challenging part. 200 elementary school children, their energy levels at maximum, all confined in one space. Took a deep breath. He'd handled worse situations. He could handle this. The gymnasium was exactly what expected. Children were seated in semicircular rows facing a small stage area where would do his demonstration. Teachers stood along the sides, trying their best to maintain some semblance of order. The moment Duke entered through the side door, the gymnasium erupted. Children jumped to their feet, screaming with excitement. "It's Duke, it's the police dog," they shouted. Some pointed. Others jumped up and down. The energy was electric, almost overwhelming. Felt Duke tense slightly beside him, but the dog maintained his composure. Years of training had prepared him for this. But noticed something unusual that morning. Among the sea of excited, animated children, there was one who stood perfectly still. In the back row, slightly separated from the other children, a small girl remained seated and silent while everyone around her celebrated and screamed. She didn't jump. She didn't shout. She didn't point excitedly like the other 6-year-olds. Instead, she sat quietly, her small frame almost invisible behind her teacher. Her name was Emma, though didn't know that yet. Her dark brown eyes were fixed on Duke with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural. She wasn't smiling or bouncing with excitement like the other children. She was observing, analyzing, studying every detail of the dog with a focus that made her look almost ancient in her concentration. Emma's teacher, Mrs., noticed the change in her usual shy student. She'd been working with Emma for an entire school year, and she knew this child intimately. Emma had autism spectrum disorder and selective mutism, a condition that made speaking in public nearly impossible for her. Emma could speak to her parents at home. She could speak to her grandmother. She could speak to her mother's close friend Susan. But in public settings, in front of groups of people, Emma's voice simply disappeared. It was as if her throat closed up. Her mind froze. The words that formed perfectly well at home somehow couldn't make their way out into the public world. Mrs. had worked with Emma's speech therapist, consulted with psychologists, and implemented countless strategies to help her student overcome this anxiety. The progress had been slow, glacially slow. After 3 years of selective mutism, many professionals had quietly begun to wonder if Emma would ever speak publicly at all. Her parents had attended support groups for families dealing with selective mutism. They'd read research papers. They'd tried medication. Nothing seemed to work. Emma remained trapped behind an invisible wall of anxiety and fear, unable to let her voice out into the world, despite being perfectly capable of speaking. But today, Emma had an unusual expression on her face. It wasn't the typical nervous anxiety that Mrs. had come to recognize. It was focus. It was concern. Emma's small hands gripped the edge of her seat and her dark eyes never left Duke for a single moment. While other children were laughing and excited about seeing a police dog, Emma seemed almost worried. She seemed troubled by something. Mrs. leaned down and whispered, "Emma, are you okay? Do you want to sit closer?" Emma shook her head slowly, never taking her eyes off Duke. Moved toward the stage with Duke, beginning to set up his demonstration area. He had prepared a careful presentation that always impressed the children. He would start with basic commands, show Duke's obedience training, demonstrate the dog's agility, and explain the critical work K-9 units performed in law enforcement. Then he'd allow children to ask questions and possibly pet Duke if time permitted. It was a formula that worked perfectly every single time. What didn't know as he began his presentation was that one small girl in the back of the gymnasium could see something he couldn't. One child, trapped by anxiety and unable to speak, was watching Duke with a clarity and perception that would soon change everything. The irony wasn't lost to fate. The girl who couldn't speak would soon speak words that would echo through their entire community. The silent observer was about to become the most important voice in this room. As stepped onto the small stage and Duke took his position beside him, he smiled at the sea of faces. He had no idea that his routine Tuesday morning presentation was about to become the most memorable day of his professional career. He had no idea that a 6-year-old girl with selective mutism was about to say something that would make national news. He had no idea that Duke's life, and Emma's life, would never be the same after this moment. Opened his mouth to begin his presentation, completely unaware of the extraordinary events about to unfold. Officer stepped onto the small stage with Duke walking perfectly at his side, their movements synchronized from countless hours of training and partnership. The gymnasium erupted in applause and cheers from the children. Waved, and Duke sat obediently, his massive frame perfectly postured, his eyes alert and intelligent. This was what loved about these demonstrations, the pure joy on children's faces when they saw a real police dog in action. It reminded him why he'd chosen this career path. It reminded him that beyond the dangerous calls and difficult situations, there was profound value in building community relationships. "Good morning, everyone," called out, his voice projecting across the gymnasium. "My name is Officer and this is my partner Duke. Duke is a 4-year-old German Shepherd who has been working with the Riverside Police Department for 3 years. Today, I want to show you all the amazing things Duke can do, and I want to teach you about how dogs help keep our community safe." The children leaned forward with intense interest, could see the amazement in their eyes. Some children were bouncing in their seats with excitement. Others had their mouths open in wonder. Mrs. remained standing near Emma, watching her student carefully. Emma still hadn't moved. Emma still hadn't taken her eyes off Duke. But now Mrs. noticed something different. Emma's breathing seemed shallow. Her hands were clenched into small fists. She looked almost distressed, though she maintained her silent observation. Began his standard presentation. "First, I'm going to demonstrate Duke's obedience training. Watch how well he follows commands," stepped back slightly and raised his hand. "Duke, sit." The German Shepherd's bottom immediately hit the floor with perfect form. The children clapped enthusiastically. "Duke, down." Duke lowered himself gracefully to the gymnasium floor, his body stretched out completely. More applause, was in his element now. He'd performed this sequence dozens of times, and it never failed to impress. "Now watch this," called out. "Duke, heel." The dog jumped to his feet and walked perfectly at his side as the officer moved across the stage. The children were mesmerized. Some girls in the front row were literally bouncing with excitement. Teachers were smiling. Parents who'd been invited to observe stood at the back of the gymnasium with cameras ready, capturing every moment. But Emma remained motionless, completely still, trapped in her own world of silent observation. Continued with his demonstration, showing the children various commands. "Stay." Duke remained frozen in position as walked away. "Come." Duke ran and sat directly in front of. "Play dead." Duke flopped over dramatically, causing a burst of laughter from the audience. Was enjoying this. The energy was perfect. The children were engaged. Duke was performing flawlessly. Everything was going exactly according to plan. Then decided to introduce an element that always amazed the children. "Now I'm going to show you Duke's tracking ability. Can I get a volunteer?" Dozens of hands shot up immediately. Children were practically jumping out of their seats, desperate to be chosen. Pointed to a boy in the front row. "You there, what's your name?" "I'm Tommy," the boy shouted excitedly. "Okay, Tommy, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give Duke something that smells like you. Then you're going to run and hide somewhere in this gymnasium, and Duke is going to find you. Sound good?" Tommy nodded eagerly and ran off to hide behind the bleachers on the far side of the gymnasium. Handed Duke one of Tommy's socks that the boy had provided earlier. He held it under Duke's nose. "Find Tommy, boy, find him." Duke's nostrils flared as he caught the scent. His body tensed with focus. Then, with incredible precision, Duke raced across the gymnasium floor, his nose to the ground, following the invisible trail of scent particles that only he could detect. The children erupted in amazement and applause as Duke rushed toward the bleachers and began barking. "There! Duke found him!" Tommy emerged from his hiding spot laughing and amazed. Duke raced to him, tail wagging, receiving enthusiastic praise from the delighted boy. Brought Duke back to the stage. That's just one example of how important Duke's nose is. A dog's sense of smell is thousands of times better than a human's. This helps us find missing people, detect drugs, and solve crimes. The demonstration continued flawlessly, showed the children Duke's jumping ability, his attacking training on the padded sleeve, his calm behavior in stressful situations. Every moment was perfectly choreographed. Every moment worked beautifully. The children were completely captivated. This was going to be one of his best presentations yet. Could feel it. But something was happening in the back of the gymnasium that couldn't see. Emma's behavior was changing dramatically. The girl who had remained perfectly still throughout the entire demonstration was beginning to shift in her seat. Her small hands were trembling. Her breathing had become visibly irregular. Mrs. bent down and whispered urgently, "Emma, Emma, are you okay? Do you need to go to the nurse's office?" Emma didn't respond verbally. She never did in public, but she shook her head. However, she did something unprecedented. She stood up, slowly, deliberately, while still holding her teacher's hand. Mrs. was shocked. Emma never voluntarily stood up in front of crowds. Emma never drew attention to herself. This was completely out of character. "Emma, sweetheart, you can sit down." "It's okay," Mrs. whispered, trying to gently guide her student back to her seat. But Emma resisted. She pulled her hand gently free from her teacher's grip and began walking forward, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes locked on Duke with unwavering intensity. Mrs. Hart began to race. She'd never seen Emma act like this before. It was as if the girl was being pulled by an invisible force toward the stage. Other children noticed Emma's movement. Quiet whispers began rippling through the gymnasium. "Why is that girl walking up there? Is she going to say something?" Teachers exchanged confused glances. This wasn't part of the planned program. Noticed the commotion and looked to see what was happening. A small girl was making her way through the seated children, walking toward the stage with an expression of intense focus and concern. She looked almost worried, almost frightened, but she kept walking forward, step after determined step. "Hello there, sweetheart," called out warmly, assuming this was just an enthusiastic child who wanted to pet Duke. He knelt down with his trademark gentle smile, ready to engage with the curious youngster. "What's your name?" Emma stopped a few feet away from Duke. She didn't answer the question. She didn't speak at all. Instead, she simply pointed directly at Duke's left hind leg. Her small hand was trembling as she pointed. Her dark eyes were filled with something couldn't quite identify. Was it fear? Was it concern? Was it recognition of something important? "Would you like to pet Duke?" asked, still smiling, still assuming this was normal childhood enthusiasm. Emma shook her head. She pointed again at Duke's leg, more insistently this time. She was trying to communicate something, trying desperately to convey information that felt vitally important to her. Mrs. had moved closer now, standing just behind Emma, completely bewildered by her student's unprecedented behavior. Then, after 3 full years of selective mutism, after 3 years of remaining silent in public, after 3 years of trapped words and frozen vocal cords, Emma took a deep breath, opened her mouth, and spoke clearly into the gymnasium. 2 simple words. 2 words that would echo through their entire community. 2 words that would change everything. "He's hurt." The gymnasium fell absolutely silent. Every child stopped moving. Every teacher froze in place. Every parent stopped breathing. Even the background noise of the gymnasium seemed to vanish. The only sound was Emma's small voice, clear and steady, speaking words that no one in this school had ever heard her say publicly before. Officer's smile faded instantly. His professional instincts activated immediately. He turned to look at Duke with fresh eyes, no longer seeing his familiar partner with casual confidence, but examining him carefully for any sign of injury or distress. Emma pointed at Duke's leg again. "Hurt. Bad," she said, her voice growing slightly stronger, as if the words were breaking through a barrier that had held them captive for years. The gymnasium remained in absolute, stunned silence. Emma's words hung in the air like an explosion that had just detonated. "He's hurt. Bad." 4 simple syllables. 4 syllables that contained more power than anyone in that gymnasium could have anticipated. Officers didn't ask confused 6-year-old girls for medical diagnoses of their police dogs. Police dogs didn't have injuries that untrained children could identify before trained officers missed them. This wasn't how reality worked. This wasn't how the world operated according to every rule and precedent had learned in his 17 years of law enforcement. Yet here it was, happening real. Officer's mind raced. He forced himself to look at Duke with clinical objectivity, abandoning the familiar affection he typically felt toward his partner. Emotions had no place in emergency assessment. He needed to examine Duke like a stranger. He needed to see what the small girl had seen. "Duke, stand," commanded, his voice suddenly all business. The dog immediately rose to his feet, his posture perfect despite the scrutiny, ran his large hands along Duke's muscular body, checking for signs of injury. He felt along the dog's back, across his ribs, down his front legs. Everything felt normal. He moved to Duke's right hind leg, running his hands carefully along the muscle and bone. Nothing. No swelling, no heat, no sign of injury. Began to feel almost relieved. Perhaps the girl was simply confused. Perhaps she was making things up, as children sometimes did. Then he remembered Emma's pointed insistence. "He's hurt. Bad." The certainty in her young voice, the intensity in her dark eyes, the way she'd walked through an entire gymnasium of children to deliver this message. This wasn't a confused child making random statements. This was something different. This was deliberate, purposeful, real. Moved to Duke's left hind leg. He began at the ankle and worked his way upward, feeling carefully for any abnormality. The fur was thick and uniform. The surface felt normal. But then, as his fingers moved higher along the inner thigh, he felt it. A subtle difference in the tissue. A slight swelling that was barely perceptible beneath the thick fur and muscle. His breath caught in his throat. The girl was right. "Duke down," said quietly. The dog immediately lowered himself to the gymnasium floor, carefully examined the swollen area more closely, gently palpating the tissue. Duke flinched, a microreaction that the dog had been trained not to display during public appearances, but this time the pain was just enough to overcome years of conditioning. Stomach tightened. This was more serious than he'd initially thought. He looked up at Emma, who remained standing at the edge of the stage, her small body still trembling. She was watching him with those intense dark eyes, as if confirming what she already knew, that she had been right, that she had seen something that everyone else had missed, that her voice, after 3 years of silence, had emerged to deliver a message that mattered. Mrs. moved forward, placing a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. Her teacher's expression was a mixture of shock, concern, and overwhelming maternal instinct. She didn't understand what was happening, but she understood that her shy, silent student had just done something extraordinary. Stood up, his mind shifting into crisis management mode. "Mrs. Williams," he called to the facility coordinator who was standing at the back of the gymnasium. "I need to take Duke to the veterinary clinic immediately. Can you help me with transportation arrangements?" Mrs. Williams hurried forward, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Of course, officer, what's wrong? What happened?" "I'm not entirely sure yet," replied, his eyes never leaving Emma. "But this young lady identified a potential injury to Duke that I somehow missed. We need to get him examined by a veterinarian right away." The gymnasium erupted in confused murmuring. Children began asking their teachers questions in loud whispers. Parents craned their necks to understand what was happening. The carefully planned, perfectly controlled demonstration had transformed into something completely unexpected, something genuine, something real. Knelt down in front of Emma, studying this small girl who had just accomplished something remarkable. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Emma didn't answer immediately. Speaking once had taken enormous courage. Speaking twice felt almost impossible. Her mouth opened and closed several times as she struggled against the anxiety that had trapped her voice for so long. Mrs. squeezed her shoulder encouragingly. "Emma," the girl finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Emma," repeated, his voice filled with genuine gratitude and wonder. Thank you for telling me about Duke. You might have just saved his life." Emma nodded slightly, and for the first time a hint of a smile crossed her small face. She had spoken publicly. She had been heard. She had made a difference. After 3 years of silence, her voice had mattered. It had changed something. It had helped someone. Turned to Mrs. "Is Emma her teacher?" "Yes," Mrs. said, her voice trembling slightly. Emma is in my 2nd grade class. She has selective mutism and hasn't spoken publicly in the entire time she's been in school. This is unprecedented." His expression softened. He understood now why Emma's words had such power. This wasn't just a child making an observation. This was a child who had conquered years of internal battle to deliver a message she recognized as important. This was courage in its form. "Emma," said slowly and clearly, making sure she could read his lips if her anxiety made hearing difficult, "what you did today was incredibly brave. You noticed something important when I didn't. You spoke up even though it was scary. And because you did, Duke is going to get help. That makes you a hero." Emma's small face flushed with emotion. She looked down at her feet, overwhelmed by the praise and attention, but her posture seemed stronger. Carefully secured Duke in his patrol car, the dog limping slightly as he walked. What had been a routine Tuesday morning demonstration had transformed into something far more significant. As drove away from Riverside Community Center, his mind swirled with questions. What exactly was wrong with Duke? How had a 6-year-old child, identified an injury that he'd completely overlooked, and most importantly, what had happened to Emma that allowed her to break through 3 years of selective mutism. He would have answers soon enough. But in that moment, driving toward the veterinary clinic with his injured partner in the back seat, realized he had witnessed something extraordinary. He had seen a miracle unfold. He had watched a silent child find her voice, and in doing so, she had changed the course of events in ways that none of them could yet fully comprehend. Behind him in the gymnasium at Riverside Community Center, Emma stood quietly beside her teacher, her small hand trembling slightly. She had done something she never thought possible. She had spoken. She had been heard, and the world around her would never be quite the same again. Officer's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he navigated the streets toward Riverside Veterinary Clinic. The drive that normally took 10 minutes felt like an eternity. Duke whimpered softly from the back seat, and his heart ached with guilt. How had he missed this injury? How had he overlooked something that a 6-year-old child could detect immediately? Years of professional training and experience, and yet a silent girl had seen what he couldn't see. The weight of that reality pressed down on him like a physical force. The veterinary clinic was located in a modern office building on the east side of Riverside. Had taken Duke there dozens of times for routine checkups, vaccinations, and wellness visits. He knew the staff well. Dr. Sarah Martinez was the clinic's chief veterinarian, a woman in her mid-40s with silver-streaked hair and compassionate eyes. She'd been caring for Duke since the dog joined the police department 3 years ago. She understood the importance of K9 partners and always treated them with the utmost professionalism and care. Pulled into the clinic's parking lot and carefully lifted Duke from the back seat. The dog was limping more noticeably now, putting most of his weight on his right legs. Something was definitely wrong. Something significant. Carried Duke into the clinic, trying to project calm confidence even though anxiety was churning in his stomach. The receptionist, a young woman named Jennifer, looked up from her desk in surprise. "Officer, we didn't have an appointment scheduled today. Is everything okay?" "I need to see Dr. Martinez immediately," said urgently. "Duke has developed a sudden limp, and I suspect there might be a soft tissue injury. It's possible it's urgent." Jennifer immediately picked up the phone and called back to the veterinary examination rooms. Within minutes, Dr. Martinez emerged from the back, her expression shifting from her usual professional composure to alert concern when she saw Duke limping heavily. "Bring him right back to the examination room," Dr. Martinez instructed, gesturing for to follow. "Tell me what happened." Explained the situation as they walked. The community center demonstration, Emma's identification of the injury, his own examination. Dr. Martinez listened intently, her sharp medical mind processing every detail. "A 6-year-old girl diagnosed this before you did?" Dr. Martinez asked, a note of surprise in her voice. "She was absolutely right," confirmed. "I ran my hands over Duke this morning and found nothing, but she knew. She pointed directly to his left hind leg and insisted something was wrong." In the examination room, carefully lifted Duke onto the metal examination table. Dr. Martinez began her assessment, starting with a thorough visual inspection of the dog's entire body. She checked Duke's eyes, ears, teeth, and gums. She palpated his abdomen and examined his joints. Then she focused on the left hind leg that Emma had indicated. "There's definitely swelling here," Dr. Martinez said, her fingers gently probing the area. She felt along the inner thigh where had discovered the subtle abnormality. Duke flinched and whimpered, pulling his leg away slightly. "This is causing him pain. We need X-rays and possibly an ultrasound to determine the extent of the damage." Dr. Martinez called her technician, and within 30 minutes, Duke was undergoing comprehensive imaging. Sat in the waiting room, his mind racing with worry. He thought about Emma, that small girl who had found her voice at the exact moment it was needed most. What was the probability of that? What were the odds that a child who hadn't spoken publicly in years would speak at the precise moment when her words could make a critical difference? An hour later, Dr. Martinez emerged from the back with a folder of X-rays and ultrasound images. Her expression was serious. She guided to a light box and displayed the images, pointing out the specific areas of concern. Duke has a significant ligament strain in his left hind leg, Dr. Martinez explained, her voice carrying the weight of professional concern. The strain is in the cranial cruciate ligament, the primary stabilizing ligament of the knee joint. The ligament is partially torn, which explains the swelling and his reluctance to put weight on the leg. Felt his stomach drop. A torn ligament was serious, very serious. How serious is this? He asked, dreading the answer. If this had gone untreated for another week, possibly 2 weeks, the tear would have become complete, Dr. Martinez said gravely. At that point, Duke would have required surgery, potentially extensive surgery depending on the degree of damage. We're looking at thousands of dollars in surgical costs, extended recovery time, and honestly, it's possible that even with surgery, Duke might not have returned to full duty. The damage could have been permanent. Closed his eyes. The implications were staggering. If that small girl hadn't spoken up, if she hadn't found the courage to break through her 3-year silence, if she hadn't identified this injury at exactly the right moment, Duke's career as a police dog could have ended. His quality of life could have been permanently compromised. "What's the treatment plan?" asked, pushing away the overwhelming what-ifs and focusing on the present reality. "Start with complete rest, anti-inflammatory medication, and pain management," Dr. Martinez explained. "We'll also do physical therapy and controlled exercises to strengthen the surrounding muscles and support the healing process. If we're diligent about the recovery protocol, the ligament should heal completely. I'd estimate 6 to 8 weeks of restricted activity before Duke can return to limited duty, and possibly 3 to 4 months before he's back to full operational capacity." "And if we'd waited?" asked quietly. Dr. Martinez met his eyes directly. "If you'd waited another week or 2, we'd be having a very different conversation. We'd likely be discussing surgery, potential complications, possible permanent retirement from service, and the possibility of chronic joint problems. That little girl just saved your partner's life and his career." Felt a surge of gratitude mixed with the weight of realization. Emma, a 6-year-old girl with selective mutism, had accomplished something extraordinary. She had seen what trained professionals missed. She had found the courage to speak when her voice had been trapped for years, and she had done it at the exact moment when it mattered most. "I want to contact her family," said suddenly. "I want them to understand what she did. I want them to know how important her observation was." Dr. Martinez smiled warmly. "That's a good instinct. Parents of children with selective mutism need to know that their kids have abilities and strengths that might not be immediately obvious. This little girl has a gift for observation and perception. That's worth celebrating and encouraging." Called the police station and asked them to track down Emma's family contact information. While he waited for that information, he sat with Duke in the examination room, gently stroking the dog's head. Duke's eyes were drowsy from the mild sedative Dr. Martinez had given him for the stress of the examination. The dog didn't understand how close he'd come to having his entire life changed. He didn't understand that a small girl's voice had saved him, but understood, and he would make sure that Emma knew exactly how much her courage and her voice had mattered. As left the veterinary clinic with Duke resting comfortably in the car, his phone buzzed with the contact information for Emma's parents. He took a deep breath and prepared to make a call that would change a family's understanding of their daughter forever. He prepared to tell them that their silent child had found her voice at exactly the right moment, that she had accomplished something remarkable, that she was, in every sense of the word, a hero. Officer sat in his patrol car in the veterinary clinic parking lot, Duke resting peacefully in the back seat after his examination and sedation, held his phone in his hand, staring at the contact information for Emma's parents. The number seemed to carry enormous weight. This wasn't a routine follow-up call. This wasn't standard police procedure. This was something deeply personal and profoundly important. Took a deep breath and dialed the number. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered, cautious, slightly confused about who might be calling from an unknown number. "Hello, this is David speaking." A man's voice had taken the phone. "Mister, my name is Officer with the Riverside Police Department. I'm calling about your daughter, Emma. She was at a community demonstration at Riverside Community Center this morning." There was a pause. Could almost hear the worry crystallizing through the phone line. Parents of children with special needs often braced for bad news. Heard David's breathing change become more shallow. "Is Emma okay? Did something happen?" David asked urgently. "Emma is completely fine," said quickly, wanting to ease the man's anxiety immediately. "More than fine, actually. Mister, I'm calling because your daughter did something extraordinary today, something that I believe you and your family need to know about." Explained the entire situation, the community demonstration, Emma's identification of Duke's injury, her breakthrough in speaking publicly, the veterinary diagnosis confirming that she'd been absolutely right. As he spoke, he could hear David's breathing change, could sense the emotional shift happening on the other end of the line. "Emma spoke?" David asked, his voice filled with wonder and emotion. "Emma spoke publicly, in front of 200 people." "Yes," confirmed. "She not only spoke, but she diagnosed an injury that I completely missed. An injury that, if left untreated, could have ended my dog's career and caused him permanent harm. Your daughter's observation and her courage to speak up potentially saved Duke's life." There was a sound of a phone being moved, muffled conversation, and then a woman's voice, Emma's mother, Susan, came on the line. Her voice was trembling with emotion. "Officer, did you say Emma spoke?" Susan asked, her voice breaking slightly. "She did," confirmed warmly. "She spoke clearly and with purpose. She said 2 words that changed everything. He's hurt." And she was absolutely right. Heard Susan take a shaky breath. He could sense the magnitude of what this moment meant to a mother who had watched her daughter struggle with selective mutism for years, who had attended support group meetings, who had consulted with speech therapists and psychologists, who had, in quiet moments of honesty, wondered if her daughter would ever speak publicly. "I'd like to invite your family to visit the police K-9 unit," said. "I think it would be meaningful for Emma to see Duke during his recovery. I think seeing that her actions made a real difference might be important for her, and I want to personally thank her for her bravery and her remarkable observation skills." There was a long pause. Could hear David and Susan conferencing in the background. He understood their hesitation. Social situations and public environments were typically challenging for Emma, but he also sensed that they understood the significance of this invitation. This wasn't just about seeing a dog. This was about celebrating their daughter's extraordinary courage. "We'd like that," Susan finally said. "When would be a good time?" They scheduled the visit for Saturday afternoon, 2 days away. Explained that he would make sure it was a quiet time at the K-9 unit, minimal crowds, maximum comfort for Emma. After hanging up, sat back in his seat and exhaled deeply. He'd done the right thing. He knew it in his bones. That evening, attended a K-9 unit meeting and explained the situation to his supervisor, Captain. The captain listened intently, his expression shifting from skepticism to amazement as detailed the events of the day. "This little girl diagnosed an injury before you did?" Captain asked incredulously. "She saw something I missed," admitted. Dr. Martinez confirmed that Emma's observation was medically accurate and potentially life-saving. Captain nodded slowly. "We should recognize her formally. The police department should acknowledge what she did. I'm thinking about a commendation ceremony. Nothing big, just something official that recognizes her bravery and the importance of speaking up, even when it's difficult." Felt a surge of approval. Emma deserved recognition. She deserved to know that her actions mattered on an official level, that institutions cared about what she'd done. Saturday afternoon arrived with perfect autumn weather. Emma's family arrived at the police K9 unit at 2 o'clock, watched from the station window as Emma emerged from the car. The girl looked smaller in the outdoor setting, more fragile, but her eyes were bright with anticipation and curiosity. Emma's parents, David and Susan, held hands as they walked with their daughter toward the facility. They both looked nervous, not for themselves but for Emma. They wanted this to be a positive experience. They wanted their daughter to feel celebrated and comfortable. Met them at the entrance with a warm smile. He'd arranged for the K9 unit to be largely empty, just a few officers in the distance, nothing intimidating or overwhelming. He led the family to Duke's recovery area, where the German Shepherd was resting on a comfortable orthopedic bed, his left hind leg properly bandaged. The moment Emma saw Duke, her entire face transformed. Her eyes widened with recognition and concern. She looked at with a question in her expression, as if asking, "Is he okay?" "Duke is healing," explained gently. "Thanks to you, we caught his injury early. He's going to be fine. He's going to make a complete recovery." Emma moved slowly toward Duke, her small frame almost apologetic in its approach. She knelt beside the dog's bed with careful deliberation. Duke's tail began to wag weakly. The dog remembered this girl. Emma reached out and gently stroked Duke's head, her hand moving with surprising tenderness. Then Emma did something that made her parents gasp. She began to speak. Not whispered, not barely audible, actual words delivered in a soft but clear voice that filled the quiet space. "You're going to be okay," Emma whispered to Duke. "I'm sorry you got hurt, but you're going to be okay now. I helped you." Susan's eyes filled with tears. David wrapped an arm around his wife. Their daughter, their silent daughter, was speaking. Not just speaking, but speaking with purpose and compassion. Speaking to comfort another living being. The selective mutism that had defined Emma's life for so long seemed to be loosening its grip. Watched the interaction, feeling profound respect for this small girl's courage and her remarkable connection to this dog. He realized something important in that moment. Emma's gift wasn't just observation. It was empathy. It was the ability to perceive not just physical conditions, but emotional states. She had seen Duke's injury because she could sense his pain. After Emma spent 20 minutes with Duke, gently stroking his fur and whispering to him, invited the family into his office. He showed them the X-rays from the veterinary clinic, explaining in simple terms what Dr. Martinez had found. "Emma's observation saved Duke's life," said directly, making sure Emma understood the gravity of her actions. "If we'd waited another week, Duke would have needed surgery. He might not have been able to work as a police dog anymore. But because you saw that something was wrong and told me about it, Duke is going to be fine." Emma listened intently, her small face solemn with the weight of understanding. She had done something important. She had used her voice to make a real difference. "I want to do something special for Emma," said, looking at David and Susan. "The police department would like to officially recognize her bravery. We're planning a small ceremony next month where we can thank her properly and present her with a special commendation. Would your family be interested in attending?" David and Susan exchanged glances filled with wonder and gratitude. They nodded simultaneously. "We would be honored," Susan said, her voice trembling with emotion. As the family left the K9 unit that afternoon, Emma turned back to look at Duke one last time. The girl waved, and Duke's tail wagged in response. It was a moment of perfect connection, a silent girl who had found her voice, and a police dog who had been saved by that voice. Stood watching them leave, realizing that he'd been wrong about something earlier in the week. He'd thought this was just about Emma speaking for the first time, but it was so much more than that. It was about a girl discovering her power. It was about a family discovering their daughter's strength. It was about a community discovering that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most important messages. 3 weeks had passed since Emma's visit to the police K-9 unit, and the change in her was undeniable. Mrs. noticed it immediately when Emma returned to school on Monday. The girl who had sat silently through countless lessons, who had communicated through written notes and shy whispers, was now raising her hand during class discussions. Tentatively at first, but with increasing confidence. "Emma, would you like to share your answer?" Mrs. asked during a math lesson, genuinely surprised to see Emma's hand raised. Emma stood slowly, her small body still showing signs of nervousness, but her voice came through clearly. 12. 12 plus 8 equals 20. The other children turned to look at Emma in surprise. This quiet girl who rarely spoke was now answering questions in front of the entire class. Mrs. felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been Emma's teacher for an entire school year and had never heard her speak voluntarily in class before. This was unprecedented progress. Emma's speech therapist, Dr. Michael Torres, requested an emergency meeting with Emma's parents and Mrs. 2 weeks after the police station visit. They gathered in Mrs.'s classroom after school, all of them wondering what the urgent meeting was about. Dr. Torres, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and extensive experience with selective mutism, began by explaining his observations. "I've been working with Emma for 8 months, Dr. Torres said carefully, reviewing his notes. In that time, she's shown incremental progress, but in the last 3 weeks, there's been a dramatic shift. Emma has initiated conversations with me during our therapy sessions. She's speaking in class. According to Mrs.'s reports, she's even speaking to other students at lunch." Emma's mother, Susan, reached over and squeezed her husband David's hand. They'd been hopping for progress for so long that hearing these words felt almost surreal. "What changed?" David asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Something happened," Dr. Torres explained. "Something that gave Emma a reason to speak that was more powerful than her anxiety about speaking. When children with selective mutism encounter a situation where speaking feels necessary, where it matters more than the fear, they can sometimes break through the barrier. Emma found that reason." Mrs. added her perspective. "I believe the reason was that police dog. Emma saw something important, and speaking became more important than her anxiety. She proved to herself that she could do it. Now she knows her voice matters." Over the next several weeks, Emma's transformation became increasingly visible. She began asking questions during lessons, volunteering answers, even joining group discussions in small circles. Her classmates, who had known her as the quiet girl in the back of the classroom, started engaging with her differently. They asked her questions. She answered. Friendships began to form. One afternoon, Mrs. observed Emma sitting at lunch with 2 other second graders, girls named Sophie and Maya. They were discussing their favorite animals. Emma was speaking animatedly, describing her observations about how different animals moved differently and why that mattered for their survival. Sophie and Maya listened intently, asking Emma questions about her animal knowledge. Mrs. felt her heart swell. This was what she'd hoped for. This was what every educator hoped for, a child finding confidence, finding voice, finding connection. Emma's parents noticed dramatic changes at home as well. What had been occasional whispered words at the dinner table became regular, enthusiastic conversation. Emma would come home from school and excitedly tell her parents about what she'd learned, what she'd observed, what her classmates had said to her. She began drawing detailed pictures of animals with accompanying notes about their physical characteristics, behaviors, and unique abilities. "Look at this," Emma said one evening, showing her mother a detailed drawing of a German shepherd. She'd labeled various parts: strong legs, alert eyes, sensitive nose. Below the drawing, she'd written in her careful second-grade handwriting, "Dogs like Duke have special powers. Their nose can smell 10,000 times better than people. That's why they're important." Susan read the note with tears streaming down her face. Her daughter, her silent, anxious daughter, had not only found her voice but had found a passion. She was using her voice to share knowledge, to educate, to express herself. Emma's interest in animals and veterinary medicine deepened. She asked her parents to take her to the library, where she checked out every book they had about dogs, veterinary medicine, and animal care. She watched educational videos about how vets helped injured animals. She became obsessed with understanding how Dr. Martinez had figured out what was wrong with Duke, why X-rays and ultrasounds were important, how medicine and observation worked together. One day, Emma came home with a special announcement for her parents. "I want to be a veterinarian," she declared with absolute conviction. "I want to help animals like Duke. I want to figure out what's wrong when they get hurt." David and Susan exchanged glances filled with wonder. Their daughter had not only found her voice but had found her direction. She had discovered a purpose that resonated with her natural gifts, her observation skills, her empathy, her ability to perceive things others missed. Mrs. began working with Emma on a special project. She suggested that Emma give a presentation to the class about what she'd learned from her experience with Duke. Emma's first reaction was anxiety, the familiar tightness in her chest, the familiar resistance to public speaking. But then she thought about Duke. She thought about how important it had been to speak up when she saw something wrong. She thought about how her voice had mattered. "Okay," Emma said quietly, "I'll do it." The preparation process took 2 weeks. Mrs. worked with Emma on her presentation, helping her organize her thoughts and build her confidence. Emma created visual aids, drawings of dogs, diagrams of the leg injury, information about ligaments and healing. She wrote note cards with key points, though increasingly she found herself speaking from memory rather than reading from the cards. The morning of the presentation arrived. Emma stood in front of her second-grade class, her small body trembling slightly, her hands shaking as she held her visual aids. But her voice was steady as she began to speak. "My name is Emma, and I want to tell you about something that happened to me," she began. "I saw a police dog named Duke at our school, and I noticed he was hurt. I told officer, and we found out that Duke had a hurt leg. If no one had noticed, Duke might have gotten really sick." The children listened with rapt attention as Emma explained ligaments, healing, observation, and the importance of speaking up when you notice something important. She showed her drawings and explained what she'd learned about veterinary medicine. She described her visit to the police K-9 unit and how she'd watched Duke begin his recovery. When Emma finished her presentation, the entire class erupted in applause. Her classmates asked her numerous questions, all of which she answered thoughtfully and clearly. Mrs. watched from the side of the classroom, tears of joy flowing freely. This girl, this remarkable girl, had transformed from a child who couldn't speak publicly to a child who could educate and inspire her peers. That evening, Mrs. called Susan and David to share what had happened during the presentation. She could hear the emotion in Susan's voice as her teacher described Emma's performance. "She's going to be okay," Susan whispered. "Our Emma is going to be okay." But more than okay, Mrs. thought. Emma wasn't just going to be okay. Emma was discovering her voice, her purpose, her potential. She was transforming from a child trapped by anxiety into a girl discovering her gifts. And it had all started with 2 simple words spoken at the perfect moment. "He's hurt." Emma's selective mutism didn't disappear completely. There were still moments when anxiety made speaking difficult. There were still situations that challenged her, but the barrier that had seemed impenetrable for 3 years had cracked open, and through that crack, Emma had found her voice. And once found, she had no intention of losing it again. Officer received a phone call on a Thursday afternoon that changed everything. It was from Jennifer Martinez, a news reporter at KRVS Channel 7, the local television station that covered Riverside and the surrounding communities. Jennifer had heard about Emma and Duke through social media posts that Mrs. had shared with other teachers in the district. The story was spreading through the community grapevine, a remarkable tale of a silent girl who had found her voice at precisely the right moment to save a police dog's life. "Officer, we'd like to do a feature story on this incredible incident," Jennifer explained over the phone. "The story of a child with selective mutism diagnosing an injury that a trained professional missed. It's extraordinary. It's the kind of human interest story that resonates with people. We'd like to interview you, the veterinarian, Emma's family, and of course Emma herself, if she's willing." Hesitated. He understood the appeal of the story, but his first concern was Emma's. The girl had been struggling with selective mutism for years. Putting her on television could be overwhelming. He told Jennifer he would need to consult with Emma's parents before committing to anything. That evening, called David and Susan. He explained the media interest and asked whether they felt comfortable with their daughter's story being featured on the news. There was a long pause before Susan responded. "Let me talk to Emma," Susan said thoughtfully. "If she wants to do this, I think it could be powerful. It could send an important message to other children who struggle like she does." When spoke with Emma directly, the girl surprised him with her answer. In her soft but increasingly confident voice, Emma said, "I want to tell people about Duke. I want them to know that it's okay to speak up when you see something important." The interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday. A camera crew from KRVS Channel 7 arrived at the police station early in the morning. Prepared Duke for the cameras. The dog's leg had healed significantly over the past month, and while he was still on restricted duty, he could move around much more comfortably. Dr. Martinez agreed to participate in the interview via video call to provide medical context. When Emma arrived at the police station with her parents, she was visibly nervous. Her hands trembled slightly and she stayed close to her mother. But when she saw Duke, something shifted in her. The girl's expression softened. Her shoulders relaxed. She had a reason to speak, not to the cameras or the reporters, but to Duke, the dog who had given her life new meaning. The interview began with explaining the incident at the community center. He described Emma's identification of Duke's injury and her breakthrough in speaking publicly. His words were warm and filled with genuine admiration for the young girl. Then it was Emma's turn. The cameras focused on her small face as she sat beside Duke, gently stroking his fur. The reporter, Jennifer Martinez, asked gentle questions designed not to overwhelm her. "Emma, can you tell us what you saw that day at the community center?" Emma took a deep breath, her eyes locked on Duke. "Duke's leg was hurt," she said clearly. "I could see it. I could see that something was wrong." "How did you know?" Jennifer asked softly. "I watch things," Emma explained. "I look at details that other people don't always see, and I knew Duke was in pain." "Were you scared to tell Officer what you noticed?" Emma nodded slightly. "I was scared to talk. I haven't talked in front of people for a long time, but Duke needed help, so I talked." The simplicity and honesty of her words were powerful. As the interview continued, Emma spoke about her experience with selective mutism, her love of animals, and her newfound confidence in using her voice. She wasn't eloquent or polished. She was a second grader speaking authentically about her experience. And that authenticity was more powerful than any rehearsed statement could have been. Dr. Martinez appeared on the video call segment, explaining the medical significance of Emma's observation. She discussed the ligament strain, the potential consequences if the injury had gone untreated, and her amazement that a child had identified what many trained professionals might have missed. "This child has a gift," Dr. Martinez said directly to the camera. "She sees things with remarkable clarity, and she had the courage to speak up. That combination saved this dog's life." The segment aired on Thursday Evening News. Within hours, the video had been shared on social media platforms hundreds of times. By Friday morning, it had been viewed tens of thousands of times. By Saturday, the viewership had exceeded 200,000. The comments section filled with responses from people across the country. Parents of children with selective mutism sharing their own stories. educators commenting on the importance of listening to quiet voices, animal lovers celebrating Duke's recovery, and individuals inspired by Emma's courage. By Sunday, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. Emma, the 6-year-old girl who had diagnosed a police dog's injury and found her voice in the process, was becoming a national story. Parents of children with selective mutism began reaching out to Emma's family, sharing their own experiences and expressing gratitude for having their children's struggles recognized and validated. A children's hospital in a neighboring state requested permission to feature Emma's story in their waiting rooms and educational materials. An autism advocacy organization asked if they could use her story in their awareness campaigns. A publisher contacted the family about potentially writing a children's book about Emma's experience. Emma's school received calls from educators across the district and beyond, asking for information about Mrs. Classroom and her approach to working with children who had communication differences. The attention was overwhelming, but the impact was undeniable. Emma's classmates treated her differently after the news segment aired, not with mockery or ostracism, but with genuine admiration. Sophie and Maya, her new friends, became even more protective and proud of their friend. When children from other classes learned that Emma was the girl from the news, they asked her about her experience. Emma, still managing her anxiety but no longer trapped by it, found herself becoming a kind of ambassador for children with selective mutism and autism. Mrs. received an email from a parent whose child had selective mutism. The parent wrote, "Thank you for teaching Emma. Seeing her speak on that news broadcast gave my child hope. My child watched it 3 times and told me, if Emma can do it, maybe I can too. You've changed our family's life." David and Susan read that email together, tears flowing freely. This was bigger than they'd imagined. Their daughter's courage wasn't just changing Emma's life. It was changing the lives of children and families across the country who struggled with similar challenges. At the police station, Officer's desk was covered with letters and emails from people thanking Emma and Duke for their story. He received dozens of requests for Emma to make appearances at schools, community events, and awareness organizations. He carefully screened the requests and only passed along the ones that felt appropriate and manageable for a 7-year-old girl. Duke, fully recovered from his injury and cleared to return to full duty, became something of a celebrity as well. The K9 unit received volunteer applications from people who'd seen the news story and wanted to help with police dog programs. The community's engagement with the police department increased significantly, all because of a small girl's courage and a dog's injury that happened at exactly the right moment. Emma's story had transcended the local level and entered the cultural consciousness. It became a symbol of the power of observation, the importance of listening to quiet voices, and the potential within children who experience communication challenges. It demonstrated that disability and difference didn't diminish a child's value or abilities. It often simply meant they had unique gifts that the world needed to recognize and celebrate. In living rooms across the country, parents of children with selective mutism watched Emma's interview and felt hope. In classrooms, teachers discussed the importance of creating safe spaces for all students to express themselves. In hospitals and therapy offices, professionals shared Emma's story as an example of breakthrough and transformation. And in Riverside, a small girl who had been trapped by anxiety for 3 years had become a beacon of hope and inspiration for countless others. All because she found the courage to speak 2 words at precisely the moment they mattered most. 6 months had passed since that fateful Tuesday morning at Riverside Community Center. 6 months since Emma's 2 words had echoed through a gymnasium and changed the trajectory of multiple lives. The police department had organized a formal recognition ceremony to honor Emma's extraordinary courage and her remarkable impact on the community. It was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in early spring, and the gymnasium at Riverside Community Center, the exact location where everything had begun, was filled with people who had been touched by Emma's story. The gymnasium was transformed for the occasion. Local news crews set up cameras in designated areas. Officers in full uniform lined the walls. Parents, teachers, students, and community members filled the seats. In the front row sat Emma's family, David and Susan, Emma's grandmother, and her younger brother Timothy. Emma sat between her parents, wearing a pale blue dress that her mother had specially chosen for the occasion. The girl's hands trembled slightly with nervous anticipation, but her eyes were bright with understanding. She knew what this day meant. She understood that her courage was being officially recognized. Officer stood at the podium, Duke at his side. The German Shepherd had fully recovered from his injury and was now back to complete operational capacity. But Duke would always carry with him the invisible mark of having been saved by a 6-year-old girl's voice. Looked out at the crowd, preparing to speak about one of the most meaningful events of his professional career. 6 months ago, began, his voice steady and filled with emotion, a quiet girl noticed something that a trained police officer missed. She saw pain, she saw injury, she saw something important. And despite struggling with selective mutism, despite the anxiety that had trapped her voice for 3 years, she found the courage to speak. 2 words, that's all it took. 2 words, he's hurt. Those 2 words changed my life. They changed Duke's life. And I believe they've changed the lives of countless people across this country. Paused, allowing his words to settle into the gymnasium. He continued, describing the medical significance of Emma's observation, the potential consequences if her voice had remained silent, and the ripple effects that had followed. But more importantly, said, his voice becoming more personal, Emma taught me something invaluable. She taught me that observation is a gift. She taught me that quiet voices often carry the most important messages. She taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's speaking anyway, even when every instinct tells you to stay silent. When it was time for the formal recognition, Captain stepped forward with a special certificate. The document bore the official seal of the Riverside Police Department and recognized Emma for her extraordinary observation skills, her courage in speaking up, and her remarkable contribution to the safety and of Police K-9 Officer Duke. Emma, Captain said formally, the Riverside Police Department officially recognizes your bravery, your intelligence, and your compassionate heart. You have demonstrated that age is no barrier to making a profound difference in our community. This certificate is presented to you in recognition of your service to this department and to Duke. As Emma walked to the front of the gymnasium to accept the certificate, the entire room erupted in standing ovation. The sound was thunderous. People applauded with genuine appreciation and admiration. Emma's face flushed with emotion as she accepted the certificate from Captain, placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of affection and respect that made the moment even more powerful. Then Emma was asked to say a few words. She stepped to the microphone, which had been lowered to accommodate her small height. Her parents held their breath. They'd never expected their daughter to be asked to address a gymnasium full of people, but Emma had come so far. Emma had found her voice. She gripped the microphone with both small hands and looked out at the sea of faces. For a moment, the old anxiety flickered across her expression. Then she took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and confident. "My name is Emma," she began. 6 months ago, I was very scared to talk. I had selective mutism, which means my voice was stuck inside. But when I saw Duke was hurt, I knew I had to say something. I was scared, but helping Duke was more important than being scared. Emma paused, gathering her thoughts with remarkable composure for a 7-year-old. I learned something important, she continued. I learned that everyone has something special to say, even quiet people, even people with autism like me. Our voices matter, our observations matter, and if we're brave enough to speak, we can help people and animals we care about. She looked directly at Officer and Duke. Thank you for listening to me when I was scared to talk. Thank you for believing that what I said was important. And thank you, Duke, for helping me find my voice." Emma stepped back from the microphone to another round of applause, this time more emotional, more moved by the sincerity and profundity of her words. Dr. Sarah Martinez was recognized for her professional assessment and her role in confirming Emma's observation. Mrs. was honored for her dedicated work with Emma and her commitment to creating a classroom where every student felt valued and heard. Officer received recognition for his professionalism and for following through on a child's observation with the seriousness it deserved. But the true hero of the day was undoubtedly Emma. Throughout the ceremony, people approached her family with tears in their eyes, sharing stories of how Emma's courage had inspired them. Parents spoke about how their children with selective mutism had become more confident after seeing Emma's interview. Teachers discussed how they'd changed their classroom practices to better listen to quiet voices. Mental health professionals explained how they'd used Emma's story to help their young patients understand that their challenges didn't diminish their value. An elderly woman approached Emma after the ceremony and knelt down to her eye level. "My granddaughter has selective mutism," the woman said, her voice trembling. "She watched your news interview 6 times. She's been talking more at school since then. She told me, if Emma can do it, I can do it too. You changed her life. You changed our family." Emma listened intently, her young face serious with the weight of understanding what her actions meant to others. She reached out and hugged the woman, a gesture of pure compassion and connection. That evening, after the ceremony had ended and the gymnasium had been cleared, Emma sat with her parents in their living room. She was holding the official certificate from the police department, studying it carefully with the same observant precision she applied to everything. "How do you feel?" Susan asked her daughter gently. Emma thought for a moment before answering. "I feel like Duke saved me," she said quietly. "When I saw Duke was hurt, it helped me find my voice, and when I found my voice, I found myself." David squeezed his daughter's hand. His shy, silent girl had transformed into a confident young woman who understood her own power and wasn't afraid to use her voice for good. Over the following months, Emma continued to grow and flourish. She remained in Mrs. class but was no longer the silent observer in the back row. She participated in discussions. She raised her hand during lessons. She made friends and maintained those friendships through open, honest communication. Her selective mutism didn't completely disappear. There were still situations that challenged her, still moments when anxiety made speaking difficult. But the barrier that had seemed impenetrable had been permanently broken. Emma had proven to herself that she could speak, that her voice mattered, and that her observations and insights had value. As she grew older, Emma's passion for animal observation and veterinary medicine deepened. She began volunteering at a local animal shelter and continued her studies with renewed focus. She maintained a friendship with Officer and Duke, visiting the K-9 unit regularly to watch Duke's training and to share her own observations about animal behavior. Years later, Emma would look back on that day at Riverside Community Center as the turning point in her life. The moment when a frightened, silent girl found the courage to speak 2 words that changed everything. But more than that, she would remember it as the day she discovered that her unique way of seeing the world, her careful observation, her empathy, her deep connection to animals, wasn't a weakness or a limitation. It was a gift. Officer kept a framed photo in his office. It showed Emma standing beside Duke, both of them looking at the camera with expressions of mutual respect and connection. Underneath the photo was a plaque that read, "Sometimes the most important voices are the quietest ones. Emma reminded us to listen." That photograph and plaque stood as a permanent reminder that transformation can happen in unexpected moments. That courage comes in small packages, that a single act of bravery can create ripples that extend far beyond what we can imagine. And that sometimes, all a person needs to find their voice is someone willing to listen. Emma had found her voice, and in finding it, she had given voice to countless others who struggled with their own silence. Her 2 words he's hurt had become a symbol of hope, courage, and the profound power of speaking up, even when it's frightening, even when you're small, even when you've been silent for so long that you're not sure your voice still exists. But it did exist. Emma's voice not only existed, it had changed the world.